to run to catch up with the sun, but it's sinking, racing around to come up behind you again.
A few friends of mine were into exploring abandoned places and checking locations out. Whether it's a rundown shack in the middle of nowhere or an abandoned building, we were always eager to take a look around. We don't vandalize or destroy property, we only take a look. One day, I find out that one of the cemeteries in my area is apparently haunted. It borders on an old abandoned mental hospital, and the cemetery was the burial ground for some of the unfortunates who died at that place. The asylum is 150 years old, and it was a horrible place for those who were housed there. All up, there were 4 of us. Another 20 minutes of driving, we get out and search for this cemetery. After about 10-15 minutes of looking on maps and walking up and down the neighborhood, we finally come across the cemetery's entrance. It was around 11 p.m. when we got to the cemetery. It was very quiet, barely any cars on the street, and all I could hear was a distant dogs yapping about. All 4 of us start heading into the cemetery. We were taking this slow and using our eyes and ears to catch anything suspicious. As we were walking, I hear a faint laugh coming from the trees below. It sounded like a child. I first wrote it off as a dog barking in the distance or just something explainable. As we continue down the track further, I hear the child laughter again. I turn to my friend, who turns to me, and we both just stare at each other. We both heard the same thing coming from the woods below, and were just spooked, but that didn't stop us. We pushed on, going further into the cemetery and towards the trees. We eventually ended up getting too scared and decided to turn around and walk back. I was positioned with another friend of mine about 2 meters behind my other buddies. All of a sudden I can hear heavy footsteps walking towards us to our right. I'm not kidding when I say this, but these footsteps just started picking up the pace, and we could hear these loud thumping footsteps just galloping at us. We panicked like crazy because we are looking directly at this sound and nobody's there. It was too loud to be some sort of critter, and it definitely wasn't another person. I'm now 18 and I no longer explore places, as it's too risky and I can risk heavy fines. I'm quite a skeptic, and I'm all ears for any logical explanation. Thanks. So this happened back in 2019, around November 2nd, I believe. Also, this is 100% true, though not sure if this was just a coincidence or what. So back in 2019, I was pretty much depressed the whole year. Not really suicidal, but let's just say I stopped wearing a seatbelt, smoked twice as many cigarettes as I would have normally, and didn't care much about my well-being for the most part. Due to this depression, and things getting worse mentally, I did a lot of dumb things, supernatural-wise. I've always known to not speak to the dead, knowing that when you speak to one spirit, the rest can hear you as well. I've always been extremely superstitious, and I believe in the paranormal and supernatural. Anyways, I live next to a huge cemetery, and drive by it every day since it's right across from my neighborhood. Due to my superstitions and believing that the dead can do things us humans aren't capable of, each day I would scream out the window when passing the cemetery, begging for one of the spirits to get me in a car accident. This habit started on November 2nd, I believe, so I did that each day while driving past the cemetery. Lo and behold, November 6th, I was driving to work at about 4:30 a.m. I go the same way every day and was coming up to a red light. Out of nowhere, and I kid you not, this was literally out of nowhere. I heard a loud honk from behind me, and was rear-ended by one of those big white RG&E trucks that fix telephone poles and stuff. Since I was at the red light, it basically pushed my car forward into the middle of the intersection. And once again, out of nowhere, I was T-boned by some random-ass old man in a van with his wife. I was driving an '05 Nissan Sentra at the time, and it was completely wrecked. Literally demolished. And I had not one scratch on me at all. My knees were extremely bruised. I have no idea how that happened. But that was pretty much it. This also happened, literally, on the main road coming out of my neighborhood, about a mile down from the cemetery. There are never any cars this early in the morning. Maybe one, but even that's rare for the most part. Also, while I was talking to the old man, they lived in a town, literally 40 minutes away, and were driving to the park. The whole story is so weird, and honestly, it kind of creeps me out, but yeah. I was in an extremely bad financial situation also, and was stuck without a car for quite a bit. When I was driving by the cemetery begging to be in an accident, I meant that I wanted it to be fatal, so I think whichever spirit heard me or whatever, wanted to mess with me or something. I don't know. Take it as you will. Maybe this was an extremely weird coincidence, but if not, always remember to be careful what you wish for when speaking to the dead. A little backstory. I've always been interested in the paranormal. When I was in my younger 20s and I heard from a high school friend that she was possessed at the local cemetery and had witnesses, I decided to check it out during the witching hours a couple of nights later with a friend. This story isn't nearly as interesting as all of yours, but it definitely gave me some goosebumps. We got to the cemetery around 2:30 a.m. and began walking around. First to the tombstone where the possession happened, which is the oldest part of the cemetery. But nothing happened. We walked around to various other places, including a massive statue of an angel-like being, like 15 feet high, and got the heebie-jeebies. Nothing unusual. This cemetery is fairly large, and after this section we had one more we wanted to check out before we went home. At this time it was probably roughly 3:30 to 3:45. We approached the final section we wanted to check, slightly disappointed. This section is near the woodline for context. As we approach, we start to hear noises over by the woodline. Figured it is probably a rodent or something. Nothing unusual, but we check it out anyway, and don't find anything. Disappointed yet again, we turn to leave. I pass a grave of a soldier that died a long time ago. As I pass, I hear leaves crunching behind me, and my shirt is pulled back to the point it is stretched across my chest. Obviously at this point I'm freaking out. I turn around to see if a tree branch could have gotten me, but the only branch near me was about 6 feet above my head. I told my friend, and he said he didn't notice anything. I was in the Marine Reserves at the time. I feel the soldier knew that, and that's why it reached out. Nothing else happened after that, and we left. Like I said, nothing crazy, but that's my 2 cents. So I know this isn't a super terrifying story, but this was the one and only time I've ever seen an apparition with my own eyes. Background: I grew up in the country. We had lots of strange, bizarre things happen to us during that time. I lived in a house surrounded by fields and forests, and no cable or internet, so I spent most of my time outdoors. This happened when I was in my early teens. My best friend and I were driving to go bring some food to my dad and his friend, who were working late at night on some scrap metal down the way from us. To get to where they were, there were 2 ways to go. One was the normal paved back road, and the second was a long, old dirt road that people didn't really go down. The dirt road was surrounded by trees on both sides, had some sketchy older abandoned buildings on either side, and a very old cemetery at the end. After we brought the food to them, we decided to take the old dirt road back as a joke. We used to walk that road every now and then, even though it creeped us out, but we tried to stay away from it at night. We were both laughing about how the other one was too scared to go down it. She was driving and we were laughing and listening to music when we made the turn onto the road. It was a right-hand turn, so in order to make the full turn, she had to sweep her headlights across the cemetery. I remember looking at the graves, and that's when I saw her. It was an all-white figure in the shape of a female with a long dress and long hair. She was standing between the cemetery and the forest. I stared at her for what I felt was 5 to 10 seconds before she vanished, and then I continued to stare at the spot for a good 10 seconds longer. Once I kind of came out of it, I realized that the car was stopped. I have no idea for how long. My friend and I were both very quiet, and we both kind of looked at each other like, what the hell? Neither one of us really said anything for a little while, but I finally asked her if she had seen something, and she said she did. Not wanting to say what I saw first, I asked her what she saw, and she described the figure exactly as I had. Interestingly, neither one of us were afraid. I remember when I saw her, everything kind of went in slow motion. Even though there was music going on in the car, it was quiet, and I definitely don't remember the car slowing down and stopping. I remember being in awe and thinking she radiated beauty, and she still crosses my mind to this day. I've been back there many times, during both the night and day, and I haven't seen anything like it since. Anyway, thanks for listening if you're still with me. It's nice to be able to share these stories in a serious way without people looking at you like you've lost your mind. This incident happened in 1994 when I was 17 years old. My friends and I, consisting of about 5 guys and 4 girls, decided to pay a visit to the Lim Chu Kang Muslim cemetery. We were on an open pickup truck, driven by one of my friends. Upon arrival at the cemetery at about 2300 hours, the place was very quiet, with only the sounds of crickets and gusty winds of air. The place was quite dark, but the moonlight was the only source of light we had, as we had turned off the pickup headlights. We then started our little adventure, and when we were somewhere in the middle of the cemetery, we suddenly hear the sound of crows cawing. We were feeling creeped out at that point of time, when suddenly the cawing sound changed into the sound of baby crying. Upon looking around, I spotted that we were near to the children's graves. We then decided to leave the area and proceeded to another location. As we were passing by a lane, we then spotted a Malay grave with the earth in the center of the grave, glowing in red. We then heard a faint sound of humans screaming in pain. At that point, I say enough is enough. We then decided to leave the cemetery, as we felt that we were disturbing the dead, resting in peace. So last year, myself and a good friend went on a haunted road trip of the Midwest. One of our stops was a place I've heard about since I was a kid, Dartford Cemetery. It was at night on the 4th of July, and a fireworks show had just ended, leaving the air smelling of sulfur. We parked under a streetlight, a little bit down the road of the cemetery, to set up our equipment, GoPro, voice recorder, etc. We started on the side of the cemetery that has been known to have the most activity, with the mausoleum and the chief's headstone. After a few minutes of no activity, we start hearing footsteps and see the figure of a person walking towards us in complete darkness. Several moments passed until we crossed paths with this person, but both my friend and I wanted to keep moving past. As we approached the figure, they said,
"What are you doing here?"
My friend said, "Nothing, what are you doing here?" No response. To this day, neither of us can agree on this person's age or even their gender. I thought it was a younger man, but my friend saw and heard an elderly woman. Nothing but the voice shows up on our recording. What we both agree on is that this person had abnormally long white limbs. We kept on walking and the person disappeared from view when we turned around to look. We continued our investigation with the presence of this person in mind, but not in sight. We eventually came across the chief's headstone, where I placed a token of respect to him. When we looked back on the GoPro, shortly after this moment, you can hear a hushed, disembodied male voice say,
"Run."
Since we didn't hear this in real time, we kept moving on towards the center of the cemetery. Out of nowhere, I start hearing footsteps of what seemed like a dozen or more people in front of us. When I asked my friend if she heard that, she said she didn't hear a thing. Suddenly I told her I felt very surrounded and that we had to leave immediately. We got back to the path and ran all the way to the street, where I finally felt we were safe. But it didn't end there. As we walked back to the car, we saw that same person walking on the side of the street towards us. We crossed the street and avoided eye contact as much as possible. When we were just past them, we turned around briefly and they had their neck turned all the way around looking at us. We ran to the car, and all the way, I was holding the GoPro in order to try and get this on video. Strangely enough, the person did not show up on the recording, even when they were standing under the streetlight. We never saw this person take even a step off the cemetery grounds. Thoroughly spooked, we drove away with an uneasy feeling until we crossed the town line. Something is there. Even if that figure was a real person, I know there are many active entities at that cemetery. Side note, fellow ghost hunters, please remember to be respectful at sites such as these. Leave no trace, reach out politely, and remember, many of these souls have living relatives. When I was 17, I'm 24 now, I visited a cemetery at night with a small group of friends. We were just going to look at the graves, give a little love to the graves that looked like maybe no one visits them anymore, because they were from so long ago. We were not going there to hurt anything or mess around with the graves because we were, and most of us still are, very spiritual. I had always liked cemeteries and feel a kind of peace when I'm in one, so I was very comfortable there and relaxed. I think that may be why what happened at all. I was following near the back of the group, lingering on some graves to read what was written when everything, for me, goes blank. The rest of what happens is what my friends told me about hours later. Heh, this one's mine, I called to the next nearest person in my group. He turned around to laugh and tell me to quit playing around. When he stopped, I shouldn't have died, really. It wasn't my fault. What do you mean? He asked, getting my other friends to stop and walk back to me. Well, you see, I was playing in the barn with the kittens, and the man came in with the gun and bang. I don't even think they would have believed I wasn't the one speaking if the voice coming out of me hadn't been so much higher pitched and had a very, very country accent. I don't know why he did it. He was my daddy's best friend. For the next 2 hours, I led them around the cemetery, pointing out graves and telling them about the people buried there like I knew them. One of my friends had had her phone out to use as a flashlight and recorded everything I was saying so they could face check when we went back to the house we were staying at. Eventually, I stopped again, frowning at a headstone. This is my brother. He got to live a long, long time. It's not fair. I wanted to live too, I said, stomping my foot before just collapsing on the ground. I didn't wake up until we got home that night, and I remember I had the worst headache of my whole life. My friends showed me the video. Then we all looked up as much as we could on the internet to see if I had been right. I was right about everything except one thing. The grave I had collapsed on top of hadn't been the brother of the girl who had supposedly possessed me. He'd been the son of her father's best friend. The same best friend who she said shot her. I've never been back to that cemetery since. I'm afraid a little girl won't be the one to possess me next time. I currently live in Jersey with my best friend after being kicked out by my mother on Long Island for beating my pedophile brother. Me and my friends go back to Long Island frequently, so I can see my old friends. We usually do our spooky route along Long Island. Street Hollow Road, Kings Park Psychiatric Center, Stillwell Preserve, and Cold Spring Harbor. Nothing out of the normal happened. We weren't looking for anything scary. We just used the spooky route as an excuse to drive around. We were calling it a night after we drove around to Cold Spring Harbor and put in my friend's address to drive him home. We're following the GPS, and to the left of us is a cemetery. No big deal, until we pass by it, and the entire Mother Mary statue is abnormally lit up, as if it had spotlights all around it, but light only shone from the one right in front of it. The statue almost looked fat, as if Mother Mary and Buddha had a child, and there's 2 people in front of it. One is kneeling, the other is in front of the statue. Both me and my friend driving asked out loud what the hell 2 people were doing at 12 a.m. in a cemetery standing still. I suggested they were praying, but no answer sat right with us. So we turned around. We parked on the road, cemetery now to the right of us. I'm closest to it, in the passenger seat. I swear on my life, we yell at the 2 people, and what looked to be their clothing froze in midair. One of them had something similar to a veil, and it literally froze in midair unnaturally, after waving as if there was wind. The other had a blanket over them that did exactly the same thing. When they didn't reply, me and my friends got really curious if they were statues, since they didn't look like statues and were in weird positions for statues. We pulled into the parking lot for the cemetery at the front and aimed our headlights at the 2 figures. I can't explain this part properly, but they morphed through themselves to turn around. They never physically turned around. Their backs phased to their fronts to look at us, and all of us in the car got an overwhelming feeling of dread, evil, and panic. We left promptly, got down the rest of the road we were originally on, except our friend's GPS decided that it would be great to reroute us back to the cemetery, which we never put in. We didn't even mark it on the map or anything. We just wanted to get the hell out of there. Even trying to re-enter my friend's address still led us back to the cemetery. His phone has been messed up with location ever since. We went back the following week to ask around during the day if maybe they have a cult activity or anything paranormal that happens on the grounds, except the only dude there saw us pull up and locked himself inside the office. We walked up to the Mother Mary statue, which now looks completely normal and not fat or super lit up. Only one light in front of the statue, no other lights around the back or sides. And there were 2 dead spots of grass, in the exact spots the figures were. Does anyone have any idea what these entities could have been? I've experienced a lot of stuff, and so has the driver in this. We've dealt with many things, but we still have no clue what these were. They felt purely evil, as if they couldn't even be called demonic, as that would be insulting. It was around 12 AM on a full moon, less than 6 months ago, near Cold Spring Harbor. It keeps me up at night. Every other serious experience I've had hasn't been on this level. I really just want to classify what kind of entity it is, and then avoid them like the plague. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.